In bygone eras, the anime unfolds, revealing the existence of terrifying entities known as Oni. These creatures were known for their indiscriminate slaughter of humans and any who dared oppose them. Yet, a figure named Momotarou emerged, launching an assault, invading Anagosima, and vanquishing a countless number of Oni. This event ignited the conflict between the Oni and Momotarou. The scene then shifts to Tsuyoshi, a descendant of Momotarou, who harbored an Oni child. His companion, Samadari, cautioned him against this act, citing the inherent animosity between their lineages, but Tsuyoshi, confident in his convictions, disregarded the warning. Subsequently, the story advances to the present day, focusing on Ichinose's liquor establishment. The camera pans into Shiki's room, overflowing with various firearms. While attempting to repair a gun, he engages in a phone conversation with a friend who delivers the news of his recent dismissal and his uncertainty about the future. Tsuyoshi then makes an entrance, surprising Shiki and causing him to lose his footing. Tsuyoshi demands an explanation for his firing, pushing for immediate details. Shiki retorts, telling him to be quiet and asserting his indifference, a response that infuriates Tsuyoshi due to his son's insolence. He attempts to strike Shiki, but Shiki effortlessly evades the attack. Tsuyoshi then questions the number of weapons present, to which Shiki replies that it is a liquor store, not an armory. Shiki once again silences him, stating that he has no involvement in the matter, adding that his clientele is diminishing, which causes Tsuyoshi some embarrassment. Tsuyoshi instructs Shiki to stay out of adult matters, leading Shiki to mock him for his exclusive concern for grown-ups. Tsuyoshi then taunts Shiki for being an unemployed fool, acting as if he's superior, causing Shiki greater humiliation. Shiki declares to his father that he wishes to avoid a fate like his and insists that they are not blood-related. This statement agitates Tsuyoshi, who dismisses it as nonsense. Tsuyoshi then moves aside to answer a phone call, accompanied by a mental image of a young Shiki. He receives a liquor delivery order that he intends to fulfill. As he leaves for the delivery, Shiki observes him, wishing for a more affluent guardian than Tsuyoshi. Shiki takes aim at a target with his gun, preparing to shoot, but an explosion erupts below, prompting him to investigate. He discovers dense white smoke, from which a black fog emerges, surprising Shiki. He is then seized by the black fog and propelled onto the street outside. Soon after, Samadari makes an appearance, frightening Shiki. However, Tsuyoshi arrives just in time, striking Samadari with his car and extending a hand to Shiki, urging him to enter the vehicle quickly. They speed away, but the presence of the black fog in front of Samadori indicates that he is still alive. The scene changes to Tsuyoshi driving away with Shiki, contemplating that their best course of action is to leave the country. Shiki inquires whether Tsuyoshi has borrowed funds from unsavory individuals or lenders, but Tsuyoshi denies it, stating that it is not a valid justification for running them over. Tsuyoshi tells him not to be concerned because he hasn't died, whereas Shiki feels like he's dead. Their argument escalates, almost resulting in a car crash, but Tsuyoshi manages to avoid it. He confesses to Shiki that he is of Oni lineage, leaving Shiki in disbelief. Tsuyoshi reveals that the man he encountered earlier belonged to the Momotarou lineage. Shiki initially believes Tsuyoshi is joking, but Tsuyoshi insists that it's not a time for levity. Tsuyoshi understands that it may be difficult for Shiki to accept, but it's the truth. Suddenly, the black fog materializes again, assuming the form of a weapon and attacking them, nearly killing Tsuyoshi. The black fog envelops the car entirely, impairing their visibility and disabling the vehicle. They come to a halt, and both Shiki and Tsuyoshi exit the car. They intend to escape together, but the car explodes, causing the black fog to dissipate. Shiki also vanishes, prompting Tsuyoshi to turn around in search of him. Soon, he notices Shiki moving toward a building. Inside the building, Shiki is tightly restrained when Samadori appears. He declares to Shiki that his Oni bloodline makes him a scourge upon humanity and that he must be eliminated because it is their mission as members of the Momotarou organization. Shiki, bewildered, questions how he is still alive. Just then, Tsuyoshi appears and advances towards Samadari, instructing Shiki to remain still and observe. Samadari retrieves his weapon from the black fog and lunges at Tsuyoshi. However, Tsuyoshi also draws his weapon from the black fog, being of the same Momotarou lineage, and they engage in a fierce exchange of blows. Eventually, Samadari creates distance from Tsuyoshi to avoid a hit and remarks that it has been a long time since their last encounter and that they have both aged. He addresses Tsuyoshi by his former name in the organization, infuriating Tsuyoshi, who demands that he never use that name again. Shiki is taken aback by the revelation that his father is associated with Momotarou. Tsuyoshi asserts to Samadari that his name is Tsuyoshi, but Samadari dismisses it, stating that it does not alter the fact that he is part of the Momotarou organization. He questions whether Tsuyoshi has forgotten the dangers posed by the Oni, considering he raised one of them, implying that he too will be eliminated. Samadari scoffs at his words and charges at him, delivering a forceful blow, but Tsuyoshi parries it, and they continue to exchange blows. Shiki is overwhelmed by the unfolding events, unable to comprehend what is happening. They persist in their attacks, and Samadari becomes enraged that Tsuyoshi sheltered an Oni, knowing their tendency to harm humans. Meanwhile, Shiki is stunned that Tsuyoshi has kept this from him. Tsuyoshi attacks Samadari, who is well prepared and avoids Tsuyoshi's strike until he finally inflicts a significant injury on Tsuyoshi, causing him to fall in the power of the black fog to recede from him. Shiki feels great anguish for his father. Samadari approaches Tsuyoshi and questions whether he believes he can defeat him after all that has transpired since he left. Shiki shouts at Samadari, challenging him to fight him instead, but Samadari was anticipating this moment. Tsuyoshi restrains Samadari, who questions why Tsuyoshi is defending this Oni so vehemently. Tsuyoshi believes that a father must do what is necessary to protect his son and that he will always protect him because he is his beloved son, and it is not his fault that he carries Oni blood. He questions whether Samadori intends to kill a child who is unaware of the Oni. However, Samadori disregards his words, conjuring a weapon from the black fog. Shiki experiences intense fear for his father and wonders why he is merely watching this unfold. Why is this happening to his father? He realizes that he is the target and begins to transform into an Oni. The Oni's power starts to manifest within him, his body filling with blood, and he becomes incredibly enraged, vowing to kill Samadori. He transforms completely into an Oni, breaks free from his restraints, and disappears, surprising Samadari. Weapons suddenly emerge from Shiki, aimed at Samadari, and he starts firing at him. Samadari defends himself, but Shiki vanishes again, and the dripping blood reveals his position above. Shiki descends to the ground, fully transformed and extremely furious, causing Samadari to become very tense. Shiki charges at Samadari, delivering blows, but Samadari manages to sever Shiki's arm, nearly splitting him in two. Shiki narrowly escapes, reattaching his arm as if nothing occurred. He reveals a collection of heavy weaponry and fires at Samadari, who initially blocks them but soon finds it too challenging to continue and starts to evade the incoming shots. Shiki continues to fire at him until Samadori flies into the air and hurls one of his specialized weapons, creating an explosion at Shiki's location. Now ready, Samadari waits until Shiki emerges from the white smoke and strikes Samadari powerfully, sending him crashing into the building's walls. Shiki then approaches and pins him down with his foot, aiming a multitude of firearms at him. He is on the verge of pulling the trigger but instead shoots into the air, creating a large hole in the building. Samadari is no longer beneath it as he emerges from under the rubble, furious at Shiki. Shiki collapses to the ground, the weapons begin to disappear, and he starts returning to his normal state, confused about what has just occurred. Samadari explains that it's a state of confusion resulting from memory loss and physical transformation. He reveals his weapon once more, moving towards Shiki and assuring him that his fears will cease if he dies there and that they must also exterminate all the Oni. He is about to kill Shiki when Tsuyoshi suddenly appears before Samadari, taking the hit for his son. Tsuyoshi also manages to injure Samadari. Samadari inquires, "Do you still stand by your decision after witnessing this Oni?" Tsuyoshi recalls Shiki as a child. Shiki angrily reacts to his father's injury, but Tsuyoshi smiles and expresses his happiness, shocking Samadari. The scene shifts to outside the building, where a crowd has gathered, believing there was a gas explosion. The scene moves inside the building. Samadari had disappeared, but Shiki asked him to wait. Then Tsuyoshi lay on the ground. Shiki was very worried about his father and wanted to call an ambulance, but Tsuyoshi didn't want that and asked him to listen to him one last time. He told him he was sorry for keeping this from him and that they would kill him because he carried the blood of the Oni. He told him he wouldn't be around anymore and that he had to become stronger, strong enough to kill the Momotarou. The Oni blood running through him would ensure that he could live freely so that no one could take away his happiness. He asked him to promise this, but Shiki yelled and told him to shut up and that he didn't want a farewell speech from him. He picked him up and started moving him, saying they had a lot to talk about and asked him if he understood. But Tsuyoshi closed his eyes and thought it would be good for the Momotarou and Oni to live side by side and then fell to the ground dead. But Shiki didn't believe it and told him he hadn't apologized yet and that he had told him he was happy they didn't share blood. He asked him to get up because he wanted to hear his apology and asked him to say anything. He cried a lot because of his sadness. Then a young man named Nito came to Shiki from behind and struck him, causing Shiki to lose consciousness. The man was surprised that Shiki hadn't sensed him and revised his assessment of him. Then, we moved to Momotarou headquarters. They said that Samadare had made a mistake in what he did and that they shouldn't be exposed to humans, nor should it be revealed to people that Oni live among them. They came to a solution: kill all the Oni children. Then, one of the Oni members spoke to Nito on the phone and told him he had heard that he had managed to get some to pass the test. Many years had passed since they had a successful applicant and that they would have a bountiful harvest suddenly after all these lean years. He told him that they were strong and that it was the first time they had had such Oni. He asked him if he had found another one of them. Nito told him he had brought him, but he thought evaluating him was a waste of time, and if he turned out to be useless, he would get rid of him. Shiki had a dream about his dad when they were out together. Then he remembered his death at the hands of Samadare. He returned to consciousness in a panic, with Nito next to him doing exercises. Shiki looked at him, amazed by what he was doing. Once Nito finished, he told Shiki he didn't like useless people. Then Nito introduced himself as an Oni and showed Shiki proof of that. He informed Shiki that he wouldn't reveal their location and that his father's body was in a safe place, explaining he brought him there for 2 reasons: evaluation and retrieval. He wrote on the board, Momotarou Organization, which means black fog, and mentioned that anyone from the Momotarou controls this fog, just like the person who killed your father. This organization is dedicated to exterminating the Oni, and to counter this organization, the Oni organization was created. Nito's job was to find Oni individuals and evaluate them to see if they were suitable to join the organization or not. He returned the board to its place and released Shiki's restraints to answer questions, but Shiki was furious and demanded Nito completely free him, asking what he did to his father. He said he would kill Nito if he had done anything to him. However, Nito told him he lost a point because he claimed his father was safe, when if he intended to harm him, he shouldn't have said he was safe. Nito asked if he lacked the mental capacity to understand this, pointing out that Shiki lost 35 seconds of his life by asking that question, but Shiki didn't care about anything Nito was saying. He didn't trust a word that came out of his mouth. Shiki struck Nito as a man of firm will, and he also realized that what was transpiring now was unrelated to his late father. The assessment would proceed assuming he lacked further inquiries, but Shiki remained indignant, demanding his release. Another mark was deducted due to his violent outbursts leading to his restraint. Shiki urged Nito to halt the evaluation, as it only fueled his anger, yet Nito was resolute in his intent to assess him. Shiki then pondered how to manage his anger and internally cautioned himself to regain composure. Subsequently, he revealed to Nito that he was previously unaware of the evaluation and was currently unavailable. He inquired if Nito would first release him and then engage in dialogue. He had a score to settle with his father's murderer, and implored him not to interfere, but Nito responded by telling him not to look at him with that scary face, which frustrated Shiki further. Then, upon perceiving Shiki's inclination towards self-destruction, Nito carefully hung his umbrella on the nearby board, believing he possessed the ideal solution. Nito approached closer, having loosened his tie, discerning that the conventional evaluation techniques were ineffective. He remarked to Shiki that he was not suited for a necktie, then proceeded to loop the tie around Shiki's throat and choke him. As the genuine nature of a being surfaces when confronting death, he challenged Shiki to employ his limited intellect to escape this predicament, warning that failure would result in his demise. Shiki commenced another transformation, and blood began to stream from his body. Losing consciousness, he slumped to the ground, bleeding copiously. Subsequently, the blood morphed into branches. Assaulting Nito, Shiki reappeared, now possessing an Oni physique, leveling a weapon at Nito and unleashing multiple shots. However, Nito remained unscathed. Employing his blood-infused umbrella for defense, he concluded that Shiki lacked the ability to properly wield the Oni's blood and that he would instruct him in its utilization. Although he anticipated Shiki would retain no recollection upon regaining his usual awareness, yet, Shiki pressed his attack, landing a blow on Nito, who remained unfazed, secure in his position. Following this, Shiki reverted to his original form and started questioning the events that had unfolded, examining his arm as it underwent another transformation. Nito explained that he had no memory of the occurrences and that controlling Oni blood was difficult since agitation caused a loss of consciousness and memory, resulting in widespread destruction. Shiki, however, was perplexed by Nato's explanation and inquired about the peculiar substance originating from him. Nato mused that a blade in the grip of an ignorant individual was a dangerous thing and informed him that he wasn't agitated at all and was controlling his own Oni blood, so there was no need for further explanation. He dismissed him as unqualified. This surprised Shiki, who found it illogical. He pressed Nato to reiterate the explanation, but acknowledging Nato's formidable power, Shiki confessed to Nato that while he found him irritating, he recognized his great strength. Consequently, he would suppress his pride and plead for the opportunity to follow him, driven by his desire to become stronger and avenge his father. Nevertheless, Nato declined, asserting that in combat, neglecting one's intellect equated to death. Shiki, despite this, became agitated without thinking and was unable to control his blood or utilize his mind, rendering him useless and unwanted. This enraged Shiki, yet he endured this because he sought to join him after the disdain he had received. However, Nato felt this was the appropriate moment to eliminate Shiki, preventing him from roaming unrestrained. Nato then inflicted a wound upon himself and unveiled his bloody umbrella, but Shiki remained resolute, understanding that inaction would result in his death. It was a matter of acting or dying. He renewed his attack on Nato, who stood prepared with his spiky blood umbrella. Nato believed Shiki had lost his mind, yet Shiki achieved success, managing to transform only his arm. His transformation was incomplete. Nato expressed surprise, and Shiki fired at him again, but fell to the ground, without harm. Nato disintegrated the shot directed at him by Shiki, attributing it to beginner's fortune as Shiki verged on a frenzied state. Nato then employed his power, summoning a contingent of dull soldiers targeting Shiki, but Shiki declared that he hadn't yielded and managed to avoid succumbing to rage. He affirmed to Nato that he hadn't surrendered and rebuked him, asking him if he had defeated him. Nato asked himself if he had controlled his blood, but also if he had managed to not transform into a rage. He asked how he achieved this. Shiki responded to Nato that he had to make him his apprentice to learn how. Nato would contemplate it, which frustrated Shiki. Regardless, Shiki was ignorant of Oni blood, yet he had overheard Nato's discourse on its control. He pondered the method of achieving this end. Upon observing Nato wounding himself and exposing the umbrella, an inspiration struck him. Given their shared Oni nature, he would emulate him. Yet lacking knowledge of the technique, he strained his mind and fashioned a weapon from his arm. He was successful. Wasn't it good? Nato dismissed this as illogical reasoning, which enraged Shiki. Nato deemed it impossible for someone of such limited intelligence to govern Oni blood, as thrill-seekers like him frequently struggle to regulate their blood. They represent the least suitable candidates to wield this power because typically, to regulate Oni blood, Nato reflected on his present situation, necessitating composure to avert agitation. Yet Nato would use just 30% of his power, making him bored in prison, telling himself that he needed to maintain equilibrium and resist succumbing to rage while concurrently managing his blood. He listened intently to his thoughts. However, Shiki was different, struggling in his mind as well. He was unable to manage his emotions and was incapable of employing his power in any diminished state. He pursued his desires and sought strength by any means, disregarding his thoughts irrespective of the consequences. Nato discerned that Shiki was acting on instinct rather than reason in his attempt to control the blood. This approach possessed numerous flaws but possessed explosive energy. However, Shiki avowed that he would absorb all of Nato's teachings to enhance his strength and exact vengeance for his father. Perhaps he could evolve into one of the suitable candidates, as Nato desired, but Nato refused again, asserting that Shiki's actions were foolish, a gamble with his existence. He inquired if losing control wasn't a positive attribute. A capable warrior prepares contingency plans. Should each assumption lead him to begin anew, he becomes ineffective. Nato then struck him in the head with his weapon, telling him he never considered making him his disciple, even for just a moment, but in reality, he didn't injure him with the weapon. Shiki was infuriated by Nato's denial. Subsequently, Nato contemplated accepting Shiki as his student. Surprising Shiki, Nato told him he had no chance but succeeded. He refrained from elaborating but reflected that he had failed from the outset, having prejudged him. Nato would, however, elaborate further, describing an island named the Threshold of Hell, known as Anagosima. At its heart stood an academy devoted to the Oni, named Rosetsu Academy. Distinct from any other educational establishment, it housed a multitude of Oni soldiers dedicated to instruction in combat against the Momotarou. This revelation astonished Shiki, who now realized that he was now on an island, but then he received a hit from Nato because it wasn't important now. Nato persisted, while Shiki lay in discomfort on the ground, stating that within this academy, he would acquire the means to manage his blood and master combat techniques, including general studies and an account of the history between the Oni and the Momotarou. Nato would be his mentor, and he mentioned that they would reside in dormitories, engage in daily training, and confront the Momotarou organization. Shiki felt his mind was about to shatter, while Nato remarked that Shiki's intellect was akin to the capacity of a drinking glass. Shiki took offense at this insult, but his primary concern revolved around attaining strength to eliminate the villains responsible for his father's death, but Nato clarified that it rested on him because, if he didn't become strong, he was out. However, Shiki was thrilled by the prospect of acquiring great strength, eager to join any school they had. Then, the scene shifted to Shiki's new chamber, where he was struck by the anomaly expanding within his head. Nato awaited him outside, ready to continue his training. Shiki emerged, clad in his new school attire, struggling to accept that he was returning to academia, but Nato cautioned him that he wasn't the sole individual who had succeeded, occupying the lowest stratum among them. Should he prove to be ineffective, he would face expulsion. Shiki beseeched him to exercise restraint and inquired about his father. Nato informed him that his father's body remained in the morgue, having been left undisturbed due to uncertainty regarding his faith, awaiting arrangements for his burial. He advised Shiki that immersing himself in grief was futile. Shiki perceived Nato's method as harsh, but Nato urged him to cultivate strength to prevent future regrets and avoid becoming a fool oblivious to his experiences. Shiki sensed a shift in Nato's demeanor, perceiving Nato as being kinder, but Nato proceeded, allowing Shiki 15 seconds to attend his class. Shiki protested against the fairness of the matter, feeling it was impossible, but Nato warned him that failure to comply would lead to expulsion. Shiki implored him not to act like a demon, but Nato had been acting like a demon for some time now. They arrived at Shiki's new classroom, where he was severely tired. He began to think about how to enter the classroom, contemplating whether to forcefully kick the door open with his foot or to conduct himself with the composure and dignity befitting the principal. But Nato kicked the door to enter, causing him to fall inside the room, bleeding, which made him uncomfortable. A group of students resembling him occupied the same classroom. He addressed one of the students, named Jyn, and inquired if he possessed a handkerchief. He questioned the purpose of the mask he was wearing, speculating whether he suffered from hay fever, but Jyn rebuffed him, which surprised Shiki. He then approached Jyn and observed that he had a sharp tongue, but Jyn disregarded Shiki's comments. Shiki laughed at Jyn for lacking horns like him and asked if he was a lesser demon. He could produce and control them at will, but Jyn revealed his horns, declaring that someone who boasted about them was a foolish beginner. Then, another student named Akari asked Shiki if he thought the word applied to him too, given his visible horns. Jyn included everyone in his statement, which provoked Akari. He stated that he was ready to engage in combat should Jyn desire. A female demon, named Koina, echoed his sentiments, but another individual urged them to uphold classroom rules and mentioned possessing a tissue instead of all this fighting. Another girl named Himari didn't have a tissue. There was also a boy named Rikuro who didn't care about anything and felt pain in his abdomen, thinking he was going to die. The demon with green hair intended to tear a page from the book, but Shiki advised him against it. Nevertheless, the boy with green hair insisted on adhering to the rules to ensure order, so he tore a page from the book and presented it to Shiki to serve as a tissue. Shiki anticipated that this would irritate his nose, but he directed his anger at Jyn for condescending to him. Jyn affirmed that he did indeed look down on him, which heightened Shiki's frustration. Then, Nato emerged and informed them that their purpose was not recreation. Both were shocked to see Nato behind them. Nato questioned Jyn about his pallid appearance, as if he had encountered a ghost. The students were in disbelief. Subsequently, Shiki requested a change of seating arrangements, unable to tolerate Jin's presence, but Nato instructed him to manage the situation. Nato then informed the students that today's session was meant to serve as an introductory guide to the school, but instead, they would partake in an alternative activity. Given their demonic nature, they would engage in a game of pursuit, which excited everyone with the exception of Shiki, who remained stunned that they would play. They relocated to the Shinra forest, where Nato outlined that they had 1 hour to return to the school without capture. Should anyone be apprehended, they would be restrained, and if everyone was caught, the game would conclude. Shiki assumed that this was a standard game of chase, but Nato warned them that failure to reach the target within the stipulated timeframe would lead to expulsion. This alarmed them, and Shiki expressed outrage, deeming it madness, but Nato clarified that this school was unconventional, and he had to recognize that this constituted training, as they would soon be at the front lines battling the Momotarou, jeopardizing their lives. He hadn't employed his blood, but they were permitted to utilize their own blood. However, if one of them transformed into a berserker, he would employ his blood then. Jyn inquired whether Nato intended to kill him, reasoning that if he believed he could defeat him without resorting to blood, he shouldn't lament his demise. Nato urged him to attempt it, because if they succeeded, they would graduate immediately and be assigned to the unit of their choosing. Shiki was astonished by this, contemplating that upon graduation, he would immediately confront his father's killer, but he recognized the difficulty in defeating Nato. Of course, Nato then conveyed that they had all arrived here with a particular objective, and to attain it, they must consistently prevail. He would continuously introduce challenges, and failure to overcome them would result in their downfall. Nato thought most of them were ready and turned his gaze to Shiki, questioning if he intended to withdraw. Shiki expressed anger at his question and asked him not to joke with him. He declared that if the man intended to confront him with his full might, he should expect to be retaliated with twice the force. Nato presented a couple of spheres, informing the group that one would be necessary to achieve their objective. He tossed them a considerable distance, clarifying that reaching the endpoint without one of the spheres would disqualify them. Joji, the one distinguished by his green hair, inquired how the arrangement would function, given that there were more participants than spheres. Hikari voiced his concern about the possibility of fighting for possession of the items, but Nato assured them they'd be divided into 3 separate teams. The first team consisted of Himari, Shiki, and Jyn. The second was composed of Hikari and Joji, while the third included Rikuro and Kina. The latter 2 teams would each receive a single sphere to share, a prospect that excited Kina but led Hikari to believe things would become quite intense. Subsequently, Nato indicated that they'd be going first, and he'd follow 15 minutes afterward. Shiki voiced his reservations about working alongside Jyn, prompting Nato to state that refusal would result in elimination, a remark that took Shiki by surprise. Himari assured Shiki that she would try her best not to hinder him, an unprecedented experience for Shiki, as it was his first interaction with a girl. Shiki pledged to protect her, an offer Himari deemed excessive, expressing her desire to avoid causing him any burden. Shiki was struck by her unassuming nature. Himari then approached Jyn to greet him, but Jyn displayed no interest, causing Himari to become tearful. She apologized for addressing him, provoking Shiki's anger toward Jyn for making her cry. Shiki approached Himari and told her not to cry, or her face would get all wet, but that she still looked pretty while crying. Himari felt embarrassed by his kind words. Shiki suggested to Himari that they team up and overcome the challenge together. He glanced at Jyn, declaring that his end was near. Jyn considered Shiki the type who constantly sought attention and would talk every few minutes. Facing potential expulsion, Jyn contemplated quitting preemptively to avoid being crushed. However, Shiki possessed a specific ambition and would never abandon it. Jyn dismissed his goal as trivial, which infuriated Shiki. Nato intervened, ordering them to cease and instructing the first team to begin. Shiki and Jyn departed, but Himari lingered for a moment, surveying her surroundings before proceeding. The perspective shifted to Jyn, who moved with great speed, recalling Nato's statement that killing him would allow reassignment to any team. Jyn saw this as an opportune moment to confront a certain individual. As he advanced, Shiki materialized before him and launched a punch that missed its target. They halted, facing each other. Jyn sarcastically questioned whether Shiki had transitioned from an attention seeker to an obsessive maniac, but Shiki dismissed trivial disputes. Yet he never ignored major conflicts. He challenged Jyn to retract his claim that his goal was meaningless. Jyn merely reiterated that only 2 spheres existed and that he welcomed them battling each other to obtain them, revealing his darker side. Shiki noticed Jin's various scars and asked if he was flaunting his past wounds, stating that only the weak engaged in such behavior. Jyn asserted that if Shiki were to lose to someone as feeble as himself, he'd be worthless. Jyn then displayed the scars on his hands and inflicted cuts, manifesting weaponry from his own blood, which amazed Shiki. Shiki wondered how he could do that so easily, like it was nothing. But Jyn, why can't he do this? This infuriated Shiki, and Jyn suggested that if he felt afraid, he could withdraw. But Shiki got angry again, because if he backed down now, his father's death would be meaningless. Upon realizing Shiki's quest for revenge related to his father, Jyn conceded their mutual incomprehension. But Shiki had no intention of getting along with Jyn and even cut himself to show his weapons. But they didn't work for him. Jyn warned Shiki that wasting time would come at a cost. This made Shiki really angry, and he told himself Jyn was doing all this easily, so he should be able to do the same, and it pissed him off. Jyn then proclaimed Shiki a mere appetizer before he consumed Master Nato, and deterred. Shiki prepared himself and charged at Jyn, but during their clash, a significant explosion resounded, felling trees. The scene transitioned to Himari. She was looking for Jyn and Shiki, and she got scared when she heard the explosion, wondering, what's that noise? As she progressed, she stumbled and fell. She considered herself unsuited for such a place, but felt heartened by Shiki's offer of cooperation. Still, she felt let down because she always relied on others. She resolved to head toward the source of the sound. A sphere was positioned behind her, and noticed Nato materialized beside her. The perspective shifted to the second and third teams. Rikoro was terrified by the noise, his heart pounding in his chest, but Akari found the sound entertaining and inquired whether Joji wished to investigate, but Joji declined, citing that it wasn't their turn. Returning to Shiki and Jyn, Jyn attempted to strike Shiki, but missed. Shiki attacked Jyn, but Jyn countered and delivered a powerful blow. Shiki attempted several more attacks but failed to connect. As Shiki got distracted staring at Jin's blood and started thinking, Jyn suddenly appeared and struck him, causing him to fall. For the first time, Shiki felt the pain of not understanding anything at all. Jyn, not even relying on his blood, turned to leave, but Shiki rose and demanded that Jyn remain. Jyn responded with another forceful punch. Just then, Himari arrived and was in the trajectory of Jin's strike towards Shiki, but Shiki was able to protect her. The punch unleashed a large explosion, and some of Shiki's blood splattered onto Himari's face. Shiki then demanded an apology from Jyn, but Jyn countered that if he wanted to apologize, he should just go home. Jyn assaulted his hands once more, warning Shiki that if the minor attack had frightened him, he should surrender. It would be in his best interest. This angered Shiki greatly. Himari began apologizing profusely to Shiki for his injuries, but he reassured her that it wasn't her fault. Jyn was to blame. But then Himari's inner bloody beast emerged, which surprised Shiki and even shocked Jyn, since Oni have more blood than normal people, but Himari's blood was just too much. Himari ordered them to flee, threatening to kill them. Her beast advanced. The scene transitioned to Nato. The principal arrived beside him. The principal suggested that assigning a life or death mission to Nato and the new students on their first day was audacious, but Nato asserted that practical exercises surpassed explanations. The principal noticed Nato's concern for the students, noting that numerous Oni, often children, perished annually, some at the hands of their own relatives, others captured alive for experimentation. They were ignorant and oblivious. The principal pondered their final thoughts, hoping for a better afterlife to compensate for their plight. But Nato thought that if they were strong, they wouldn't die. The principal charged him with making them strong. Before disappearing, another explosion shook the area. Returning to Shiki, he questioned whether Jyn had been killed, but Jyn attacked Himari's beast, managing to wound it despite its size. Shiki pleaded with Himari to stop the giant entity, but Himari tearfully admitted her helplessness before losing consciousness. Shiki observed her significant blood loss and realized he must move her to safety. As he approached, the beast protected her, preventing anyone from coming near. Jyn pondered whether blood possessed its own consciousness. The beast launched a devastating attack against Jyn and Shiki, sending them crashing to the ground. Himari begged her beast, calling it her sister, to stop, and it complied. Shiki struggled to his feet, covered in blood, and considered abandoning Himari in her current state, but the beast shielded her once more and unleashed a powerful sonic assault. The sound carried to the other two groups. The scene shifted to Nato, who identified the phenomenon as Himari's ability and wondered how the others would react. Returning to Shiki, he attempted to manifest his ability a second time but failed. Nato surmised that his earlier success had been a fluke that wouldn't be repeated. The beast attacked Shiki, but he avoided the blow. It then hurled rocks at Shiki, striking him and knocking him down. Shiki was outraged, having never experienced defeat before, and felt utterly inadequate. He recalled his father's demise and recognized his continued helplessness, weeping openly. Feeling weak was humiliating and disheartening. Jyn suggested that if Shiki intended to weep, he should do so elsewhere. Further enraging Shiki, Jyn then confronted the beast, displaying weaponry in both arms. He was still feeling the pain of the previous blow but knew he couldn't run, not unless he wanted it to be over for him. He braced himself for an attack. Now returning to Nato, he reflected on the exceptional skill required to wield the types of weaponry simultaneously, noting Jin's impressive accuracy and experience. Nato also considered that Oni blood could assume any form and become any kind of strength. The image a person holds moves from the brain through nerves and blood vessels and forms accordingly as a signal from the brain. Some people show their traumas, others reveal their preferences or tastes. For some, their blood reflects their experiences. What an Oni creates from their blood gives a glimpse into their lives. Making weapons from blood became known by a special term. Back to Jyn, who attacked the beast, exploiting its assault to climb upon it. He attempted to sever its head, but it dodged with incredible speed and nearly grabbed him. On the other side, Shiki continued struggling to bring forth his weapon. He observed Jyn evading the beast and realized that Jyn was limited to creating cutting weapons. Plus, this beast was Himari's sister. Shiki remembered the weapons he had in his room and what he'd made before from his blood. Meanwhile, As Jyn was still battling the beast in midair, the beast unleashed a sonic attack that caused blood to trickle from Jin's ear. Nato judged that they had reached their limit and prepared to intervene, but then Shiki produced his weaponry and ordered the beast to cease its screaming. He pointed his blood weapon at the beast and felt the weapon was part of his body. It was amazing. The beast attacked, but missed. While Shiki kept aiming and fired a projectile that obliterated the beast, Nato and Jyn were astounded by his power, and Shiki was elated.